Hey, Doc. Hello. 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 Can you hear me, Dr. Libert? I pray for you. Hello. Hello, Joshua. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can clearly.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
I was just trying to speak to Dr. Libya and I wasn't hearing his response, so I wasn't sure.
Okay, I can hear you, Dr.
Okay, fantastic. I'm just going to try to share my screen.
Okay.
Just to see if everything is happening, so just in case I'm not host.
All right.
Okay. Yeah, let me see, where is this? Where is this? Share. Interesting. You know, I'm so used to Microsoft Teams. This becomes a problem. Oh, share screen. It's just up here.
Yeah, there's a button for share screen. Yes.
Yeah. Can you see?
I can see you're sharing. Yes.
Okay. Perfect. So
yeah, I'm able to confirm. You're positioning yourself for the marketplace. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay. This is nice.
Yeah. It's very clear. It's good.
Okay. Can you still see now? No?
Yeah, I can still see. So maybe what you can do is make like a slide presentation.
Presentation mode.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, now just switching through.
That's okay.
I hope you're not seeing like the presenter mode. You know the way I'm seeing. Like
no, no. I'm just seeing like the previous slides. No, I'm just seeing the current slide and the previous one, the one that has objectives.
Okay. So okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
So if I go there, you see the next slide, right?
Yes.
Okay. Super.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll stop sharing for now.
Okay.
Okay.
All
I think
right.
everything works.
Yeah, now I think we are set.
Okay, super. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Doc.
Mhm.
Yeah, just internship, but it is well.
Okay. Where is internship, by the way?
Where? Currently, I'm working at Nazareth Hospital.
Looks as though we've lost Daktari. Is it the case or is it my side?
It appears as though we've lost him.
Okay, let me just reach out to him.
All right, all right.
Dr. Biko is rejoining in a minute. Kindly bear with us. I'm sorry for that technical hitch, but you're working on it.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. Actually, it seems like I spoke with myself for a couple of minutes. Yeah. So what was the last thing you had?
We were talking about informational interviews.
I see.
Where, yeah, so that's
Okay.
where we were.
Okay, fantastic. So can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Fantastic. Yeah, sorry about that technical hitch. Yeah, so we've finished about informational interview. We've gone to behavioral interviews. A big chunk of interviews are behavioral. So behavioral interviews just try to look at you as a person, what you have achieved in the past, and really check your maturity and your competence for the job based on your past. So what they do is they perhaps just maybe try and tease in a little bit about your past experience. So some of the common questions in behavioral interviews are questions like, tell me about your strengths, tell me about your weaknesses, tell me about a time you handled conflict, tell me about yourself. Those are actually kinds of types of questions which appear very, very commonly in behavioral interviews. That's the main interview where we see a lot of, interviewing techniques. Now, the other interview is a case-based interview. Now, case-based interviews vary based on the different industries. So I've had a chance to do case-based interviews from the medical side. So what happened is I went to this interview in this hospital immediately after I finished my internship, and they gave me a clinical case about a patient. So we started with behavioral, the usual questions, and then we went to a case-based interview. A case-based interview really want to check your knowledge about specific aspects of the job. So for instance, I was going to work as a casualty doctor. They wanted to see my kind of ability to read a case, synthesize it, understand it, analyze it, and make a plan of action based on that. So I've also experienced case-based interviews when I was doing interviews for consulting, some of the big management consulting firms. So basically, a good example of a question I was asked, having never worked before in New York, I was asked to kind of estimate the market size for some bakeries in New York. Trust me, I'd never been to New York before, and this was my first time there. So basically, they just want to see how you synthesize information and your reasoning process, and then they just want to see how well can you use the information you've synthesized to make decisions. There could be many different types, but the characteristic about them is that they give you a specific case, and they try to tease out your competencies for that job. They're closely related to the next interview, which are called technical interviews. Now, technical interviews, again, is when they try to find out if you have any knowledge or domain area expertise in the place that you are interviewing for. So for instance, again, I've had colleagues who have gone for interviews in places like Microsoft or places like maybe Tesla. And what they want to find out is, do you have domain area expertise? Let's say if you're a software engineer, they would ask you a question like, how would you handle, let's say, a new product or something? And they just want to tease out your technical expertise. So these are kind of the main interviews I've had the experience of interacting with, or my friends or people who are close to me about opportunities. And certainly in Kenya, I've had at least 3 out of these 4. There are many other types, many other types. Other types of interviews include a situation where you're asked to present something. And I had a colleague who was given slides immediately they entered the interview after doing the first few preliminary questions. And then they were given a slide of like 40 slides. And then they're told, okay, make a presentation in the next 15 minutes, and after that, come and present to us. Because they're just trying to see how well versed are you with summarizing vast amounts of information and presenting them in a very clear and precise way. So these are kind of interviews, and there are many more. Just in case you have experienced any other interview or had, please feel free to write in the chat, and then we can speak about it at the end. Like I said, today we don't have too many slides. We're just going to spend more time discussing. Now, what do you need to do pre-interview? So this is William. I've been very keen on, can you see my slides?
Yes, we can see.
Okay,
we can
the
see.
full slide, not
No, it's not full actually.
It's not
We
full.
can go maybe full screen.
Okay.
And then your video is on in case you had intended it to be on. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, just 1 second. Technical hitch. Okay, so my video is off, right?
Yes.
Okay, maybe I'll just leave it off for now. I'll put it on during the question and answer session.
That's
just
fine.
so that, yeah. Okay, fantastic. So you've been called for the interview. So what are some of the things that you need to do when you're getting ready for the interview? So one of the first things you need to really learn about is the company that has called you for the interview. I once was called in an interview with a leading pharmaceutical company, and I had to spend a lot of time really pouring through their website, understanding what they did, understanding what their priorities were as a company, trying to tease out really specific information, really nuanced information about them. Some of those things that you can never get in the website. And how do we get such information? Is again, you go to LinkedIn and try and look for people who work for the company, try to look for mutual connections who work in the company, just to understand a little bit more about it. Because you can't be told everything in the website. So the more you dig in through the company and learn more about it, then the better for you. You also need to really look carefully at your job requirements. What exactly are people looking for? Like I said, people don't take you because you're brilliant and sharp. People buy a product because it's fulfilling a certain need, and the same for recruitment. People recruit you not because you have 2 master's degrees, or you're a doctor and you're sharp, or you're an engineer, or you're a lawyer. They recruit you because they want you to do some job. So it's very important for you to grasp exactly what these people need and why you need to do that, because point 2 becomes very dependent on the first point I've said. You need to glove fit your CV or resume, your cover letter, and your stories based around the requirements they have. Now, if you think that writing a CV is enough, writing one generic CV is enough in all your interviews, then you're probably incorrect. For every job that you apply to, your CV needs to be readjusted to actually fit the requirements for that job. So if you phrased, let's say, your CV and you are applying for a job, let's say in a big technology firm like Google, and then the next minute you want to apply for another job in, let's say, Nairobi Hospital, and if you do not actually fit your CV to the job requirements, you are likely going to be, or at least be portrayed as irrelevant for that job. That's why you need to really glove fit your CV, your cover letter, and your story based on understanding the role, the requirements, the company, and other things about the company. I spoke about this last time. It's important to develop frameworks and story pools to prepare for your interviews. Probably I'm going to stop this slide here and just show you a good example of mine. So I usually put them somewhere in an Excel, just so that I don't forget some of the major things that I do. So just tell me if you're able to see my slide.
We're able to see, yeah, we're able to see the
Excel?
Excel sheets. Yes.
So this is an example of my own stories. So basically, I fitted them in a certain way. What are some of my strengths? And I fitted them in a framework I spoke to you about last time. That's the competency that they're looking for, the headline of what forms part of that story where I'm trying to highlight a certain competency. When you go to S, which is the situation, I think someone's microphone may be on. Yeah. Okay. So I guess you saw me say Hscr framework. So what does the Hscr framework mean? It just means headlining, situation, action, and results. So whenever you answer a question, it's always good to have these frameworks in mind, because it helps you give a complete answer. If you do not have these frameworks, what happens is that you do not take time to comprehensively analyze situation. And this is especially important for companies which predominantly use behavioral questions. Okay. So for instance, if they ask you about your strength, I would highlight it by saying, one of my strengths is actually my ability to establish strategic relationships. And then I go to the situation now to try and elicit how I build or establish strategic relationships.
Excuse me, Doc.
Actions. Sorry, yeah.
Is it possible to try to zoom out, because I think the font is quite
it's small.
Yeah, is it? Yeah, if it is possible, we'll appreciate.
Is it better now?
Much better, yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, so this is an example of all my frameworks, and as you can see, I have a couple of them for different interviews that I did, and I usually just try to fill them in as I go. And so remember the Hscr framework, headline, action, and results. For every question you're asked, you always need to remember this framework whenever you're answering your question. And what it does is that it makes you become much more organized, and it makes your responses to be complete. As you can see, I have done a lot of this for very many different things that I wanted to showcase. What happens is, as I build these things, these stories stick in my head. Whenever I go to the interview, I don't cram them. I actually have them top of mind, and when I'm preparing for an interview. Because what also happens over time is that you fail to remember some key things that highlight your competencies, because A, you don't note them down, and then B, you don't reflect on them. So when you go for an interview, you fail to really bring out some of the salient features that need to come out of that interview. So always remember the framework, Hscr, headline, situation, action, results. It's a good way to try to jog your memory and try to really lay out your competencies very clearly. So I'm going to go back to my slide deck, the initial one. No, not that one. Okay, just 1 second. Yeah, and maybe if you have any questions at this moment, please feel free to just start sharing them. I'd be really happy to expound on some of these things a little bit later. So, okay, this is the wrong one. I'm sure you can see now, we're back to the pre-interview.
Yes, we can see the pre-interview slide.
Okay, fantastic. And then other parts, other frameworks, the other one I really use a lot is EES, which is Education, Experience, and Skills. And this is exactly what you would use for a question like, tell me about yourself. So that's a question that people don't answer very well in interviews because they don't prepare for it. And then when they ask that question, they go fishing around. This is one question which I think in 9 of the 10, 90% of the interviews I've attended, this question usually has to start. And it has different kind of formats. Someone can ask you, tell me about yourself. Or number 2, they could even ask you, walk me through your resume. Okay, it's kind of the same question. It's a way for you to highlight, give a synopsis about yourself, present it in a very interesting way that makes someone want to dive into some stories. So don't speak for 10 minutes or 20 minutes or 30 minutes when you're asked a question like that. Always remember, no interview question is asked for granted. And so having structure helps you a lot to clear your mind and have your points arranged in a very orderly fashion. The other thing you need to do is understanding your interviewers. And I would really want to put this ahead with the other first point, which is understanding role description, job requirements, companies interview. If you have the opportunity to do an informational interview or request for one before you go for an interview, if the company allows it, then that's a fantastic thing to do. And what I'm saying that's a fantastic thing to do is in some situations, they could actually tell you who your interviewers are going to be. Now, if you have the privilege of knowing who your interviewers are going to be, then you're at a point ahead in the interview because you would quickly go into LinkedIn and really try to preview these interviewers. The more information you have, the stronger you are in any situation because then you can easily also try to relate with these interviewers in one way or the other. So a good example perhaps is if I went into an interview and found out that my interviewer, let's say, went to University of Nairobi and did medicine. Already that's a very good connection point with the interviewer because then it starts making them to see you like someone they could potentially work on. Or maybe your interviewer comes to Kingdom Church or things like that, or plays in a band or something, then those make the interview a little bit more relatable. And so it's always important to understand who is going to interview you if you can get that opportunity. So all this form the part of the pre-interview that becomes very critical in the next phase, which is the interview. So fantastic, you've done your pre-work and now you're going to the interview. So what are some of the things you need to do? I know I have shown you a framework, which is Hscr and EES. For instance, tell me about yourself or walk me through your resume. What I do not intend for you to do is to go and sound like a robot when you are trying to answer some of these questions, okay? And the reason is, if you go and highlight these points, you know, kind of regurgitate everything in a very structured way, then you start sounding like an automaton, and people don't really appreciate that because they look, to them, it seems like you have just crammed for the interview. So I want you to take the analogy of a bicycle, someone trying to ride a bicycle, okay? And you've seen those bicycles where people put those trainer wheels at the back, which just try and prevent someone from falling over, okay? Of course, eventually, the aim is not to have someone ride the bicycles all their life with those trainers. They're just there to give you support and confidence as you start. So once you've mastered your stories by heart, it becomes very easy to adapt them to the situation. Okay, so master the common questions, work on your frameworks to internalize your stories, or when you're speaking about them, let it come out very, very naturally. And this can only come out with practice. So the first step is doing the framework, then just kind of rehearsing in your mind how you would answer a question potentially. The more you prepare for interviews, by the better you do. The more natural you sound, the more comprehensive you give answers. Now, I mentioned earlier on when I was speaking to you about my camera, and there's a reason I did that. It's because when you see me looking on the side, it's a little bit distracting to you, okay? Now, in this age and era of digital transformation and COVID, where we're having a lot of interviews being done online, it's very important, to mind your posture, to mind your camera focus and your backgrounds. So for instance, if you know your camera is dead set in front of you, you could look on directly to the camera like I'm looking now. And what that does is that it makes you look like you're having an eye-to-eye contact with your interviewer. Okay, I'm going to look on the side now. The reason this is important is because if you look on the side or do not focus on the camera, is you look uninterested sometimes. And again, like I said, it could be very distracting. Okay, so always remember that you need to train yourself to look dead center at the camera so that you look like you're gaining an eye-to-eye positioning with your interviewers. So don't forget that. Also, in the era of digital, it's important to mind your background. Don't put very noisy backgrounds where there are posters everywhere and you know, newspaper extracts and all that, because what that does, it just makes the whole you know, the whole interview feel very, very noisy. And by the way, speaking to our HR and many HRs I've spoken to, that is kind of you know, very annoying sometimes when someone has to open their cameras and then there's so much noise around. And so you'd want to be very mindful of that. So a clean, nice background would be very, very good. If you're doing Zoom, also be mindful. Some backgrounds, virtual backgrounds, could be very confusing to people. Okay, so for instance, if you put yourself like you are floating somewhere in the moon, I know there's a virtual background where you look like you're in space. For a very serious interview, it could be a little bit distracting. So be very, very mindful about that. Also remember to use non-visual cues to your advantage. And I mentioned this last time. What are non-visual cues? Your posture, you should not be slumping, and you should be dead set looking at the camera. You need to look smart for the interview, of course, or take this very seriously. I know a situation where someone missed out on a big job because they did not look serious. There was a lot of background noise and all that. So visual cues also become very, very important because they tend to aid your communication. So if you're moving your hands and not flailing them all over, but there's a way you're moving them in a very graceful way, as you're elaborating points, facial expressions. For instance, if you're showing excitement, you need to show genuine excitement. Don't have a flat face when you're saying you're very happy. I think sometimes it looks very discongruent or incongruent, and it really, you know, kind of distracts people. A part of the interview also towards the end is asking thoughtful questions. Now, this is critical because at the end of most interviews, a lot of interviewers ask you, do you have any questions for me? Now, hint, hint, these questions should be pre-thought during your pre-interview phase. Now, the reason this is important is you don't want to ask questions which can completely mess up every other thing that you did earlier on in that interview, okay? So a definite no-no is do not discuss salaries. Do not ask about salaries in an interview, okay? It's a very, what can I say, distasteful question to ask, okay? Most organizations have got salary scales and all that, and that is a question that is asked much later, and do not be the one to initiate that question, okay? because then it looks like your main focus is not the job itself. Remember, you always need to at least create the impression that you're very interested in the job, even before you get to the money, okay? Because in your pre-interview session, you probably have already known kind of the pay scale and all. So do not ask about money. Ask thoughtful questions. What are some of the thoughtful questions you could ask? Ask more about the company. You know, during your pre-interview phase, you realize that the company was going through a big transition. You'd really want to relate that to your job. It makes you look thoughtful, okay? So you want to ask, for instance, I just realized the other day you acquired this other company. You know, if it's not confidential, would you mind explaining, you know, how that fits in with the bigger vision of the company? You know, questions like that. You'd want to ask about the teams that you potentially will work with. So for instance, what's the experience and, you know, some interesting things about them and who are you going to closely work with? You'd want to learn more about the manager. I remember I've been in a situation where I've asked my manager, so for instance, what is the one thing that they would never want to change in the organization if they were given a chance? You know, and it's just a way of asking them, what are some of those things that you really like about your organization? What makes you come to this job every single day? Just to learn more about that. And finally, sometimes you could ask about timelines. So you'd thank the interviewers and also then ask them, so what comes next after this? What time span do you expect them to respond to you? The rule of thumb is ask thoughtful questions, avoid obviously bad questions like salaries or many other things which create controversy, and also just try and be as relational as possible with your questions. And I know a lot of questions are going to come through in the chat with this one. Feel free to post them, but always prepare for around 3 to 4 questions, okay? So that when you're asked to ask a question, you're not one of those people who say, I have no question, and the interview ends. It's because you definitely have a question, but you want to have pre-thought about it before. You don't have to ask all 3, 4 questions. You could ask 2, which I find is a good number, but prepare for more. Because again, interviews are very dynamic. So you may think you're going to ask one question and end up not asking the other question. So always remember that. Post-interview. So what's important post-interview? I mentioned this last time. Always send a thank you note to your interviewers if you have their contact. Okay? Don't let it pass 24 hours. Write a thank you note. Okay? And be very reflective and be very honest in the thank you note. It's not a time to restart doing the whole interview in a written format, okay? But it's a way of summarizing some key salient points, okay? So for instance, I was doing an interview and we were preparing with one of my friends, and one of the things that they wrote back is that they actually commented on how they were really impressed with the interviewer's background, when of course they got a chance to ask them about their own journey and all that. And so those are some of the salient points. And then it reinforces why you really want to be in that organization. So in this case, this friend of mine said they were very happy about the interviewer's experience and especially the outlook. And that really reinforced their, the reason why they would really want to be part of that company. You also want to point out a few key things that you picked up. For instance, if it's in someone's experience, you'd want to say, this really impressed me about you and all that stuff. And you also want to just, again, give them an opportunity to reach out to you should they seek to clarify anything in your CV or in your cover letter. So always send a thank you note, okay? Don't let it pass 24 hours because it's just a way of your interviewer having another touch point with you. Most of them respond, some don't, but the important thing is remember to send a thank you note. Just even thanking them at the basic minimum for their time. Negotiating your offer mindfully, that's again post-interview. Let's say, so you are successful, you did a fantastic, fine job in the interview because you've done a very good pre-interview session. Now it's post-interview. It's time to negotiate, for instance. As I said, things like, there are many schools of thought, but for things like salaries and all that, you never want, at least in my experience, to be the first person to blurt out a figure, okay? Why is that a bad thing? is A, you could completely shortchange yourself. Okay. So if, for instance, you came in and you said 100,000, and I have been in this situation before, by the way, so I'm speaking from experience, only to find that these people are willing to give you a little bit more than that. Okay, so you've already shortchanged yourself. You've already said, I want, let's say, X, and these people are giving 3X. Of course, at that point, they could give you 2X, but you've already lost value. Okay, so the thing you should be very methodical about is negotiating salaries, and that's a whole topic on its own. Okay, because sometimes you may never get the figure you have in mind, and that's why I put this partner here. Partner is a very big term for negotiation, which is just the best alternative to no agreement. Okay, so when you go into a job, there are things that you're looking for. Of course, people want a good salary. They want the best salary that they can get. But for some people, it may not be the salary. Okay, for some people, it may be that, you know what, I want flexi hours or flexi time, which means I can come into the office, let's say, not at 8, but maybe at 10, okay, and leave a little bit later. It could be, I could have a flexi place in the organization where I could actually be allowed to work from home, okay? So whenever you are preparing to negotiate, put many things, not just the money, put many other things that you would want, okay? Because I've been in situations where I did not get the money I wanted, but I got other benefits, okay? So for instance, you have to be creative when you're thinking about other perks that you could want. So understand your partner. If it's the money and nothing else, then that's your partner. But it could be that you want a very, what can I say? A very nice place to work in with nice bosses and all that. And even though the money is not where you want it, that for you is the basic minimum. Okay, just respect and a good empowering environment. So you need to understand what your partner is as you negotiate your offer. Okay, so for instance, there's a time I didn't get a salary increase, but I got something else. I got transfer, the ability to have let's say, myself transferred to the place where I was going to work, and even maybe housed. Okay, so you need to think about several things. The other one is the last part, which I find very important. Please ask for feedback, especially in places where you have not been successful. Okay, but even in places where you've been successful. Why? Because every interview is a learning opportunity for you. Okay, so you'd want to get back to the interviewers and ask them for feedback. Like, for instance, what did you do well? I've seen in situations where people don't make it for the interview, they ask what exactly maybe did not go well, or what do you want me to improve in? The main aim of asking for feedback is not to try to defend yourself or to try to get the people to change their mind about decisions they've already made. It's strictly to learn, okay? So, for instance, I had a colleague who went into an interview, they were not successful, and they asked for feedback, and they were told, you know what, we thought you were a very strong candidate, but area XYZ is what we thought you would work better on, okay? And so then you use this feedback to try and make yourself better for the next interview. So in as much as you can, respectfully ask for feedback, okay? It will make you into a better person, and it will improve even your own interviewing skills. Now, we have got 2 more slides. I hope there are many questions on the chat so that we spend more time discussing. What are some of the common pitfalls in interviews that I have seen, I've experienced, or I've had? Number 1, poor presentation of oneself during the interviews. So for instance, if you're doing a virtual interview, you completely disregard the, the professional attire. Now this varies, okay? You're not supposed to be suited up in every interview. You will already have done your pre-interview work and known the company, okay? So if the policy of the company is to have business wear, then you really need to appear in business attire. If it's smart casual, you need to appear in smart casual. If it's a different company, then you need to understand those. If you don't present yourself ways, by the around 60% of perception is made from your visuals, okay? So if you do a poor job at presenting yourself visually, then that's a problem, okay? Because already someone's mind has already been set. Am I going to listen to this person, or am I going to find a way of showing them off? So poor presentation can also be in terms of just your pre-interview, okay? I've been in an interview where I've been told to speak about the company. What is it I like, you know, and all that. And that's the first question. You know, speak about a product I'll be working with and what do I know about it. So of course, if you don't do your pre-interview very well, you can end up not looking very serious. This can ding you from the onset. Of course, lack of confidence comes whenever you do not prepare well. And remember, I showed you the framework because it's a way of you preparing. It's a way of you forcing yourself to think through things that you could potentially be asked. So if you don't prepare, your confidence is going to show, okay? And that's going to bring into very big problems. Misunderstanding the question and the interview type is another very big pitfall. Remember, I said someone could ask you about yourself. It does not mean that now you start going off tangent and speaking about things which are not related with the job, okay? You have completely misunderstood that question. So in as much as that question wants to know you, it's also a good way of summarizing why you are a good fit for the job, why they should even ask you the second question, and their skills towards doing that. So always remember, don't misunderstand the question. Don't misunderstand people making you at ease for being informal, okay? Always put your guards up high. You want to remain as professional as possible, and still you want to remain as relational as possible. So finding that sweet spot is very important. Understand which interview type you're going for. If you do not prepare well for a behavioral interview and you prepare for a technical interview in a behavioral interview, there's going to be a problem, okay? Because you're not going to have content and things like that. Or if you go into an interview and you prepare for behavioral, only for you to realize that this is going to be a technical interview, again, that's going to be a problem because you're not going to perform well. You maybe have prepared for, tell me about your strengths, yet you're going to be asked, tell me how you develop an API for this software or for this technical product and things like that, okay? So always understand the interview type. And that's why I'm saying pre-interviews are critical for your success, okay? A good way for me to know someone who is not prepared very well is generic answers, okay? So what do I mean generic answers? Is when I ask you, tell me about your strengths, and you give me an answer like, so one of my strengths is I am able to relate very well with clients, and then you keep quiet. So that question has not told me so much, okay? Because then the next follow-up question, I would be like, tell me more about that. And when you start hearing tell me more, it's usually showing that you're not giving very comprehensive answers, okay? A generic answer is an answer that if I take myself out of that answer and put another person, it can still fly, okay? So I relate very well with clients. If I remove myself and put Dr. Libe in that sentence and it still sounds like it can work, that's a generic answer, okay? Because anyone can say it. So you need to go in depth, and the framework helps you to go in depth to produce a little bit more, give complete sentences. It's a behavioral, you know, you have to headline, you have to, for instance, give an example, you have to give the actions you took, and you have to give the results, okay? And that's a complete answer. And remember, quantify as much as you can. Always remember, the interviewer is not asking what you did as part of a team for the most part, they're asking about your role, okay? So also be very clear about your role. And that's why I told you last time, most of your points in a CV should start with an action word, because an action word forces you to think about what you did, okay? And you'll realize even in a big project, even if your company succeeded, you played a role in that, okay? So there's a small part that you did and you need to bring that out. I already spoke about inappropriate questions like salary discussions on the first day. That's just a no-no, that's a complete disaster. And that's the fastest way of failing an interview, okay? So there's some of those discussions that you do not want to have. So I've come to the end of my presentation. What are the next steps? Practice, practice, practice. I've given you a lot of notes. I've given you a lot of pointers. If you do not practice, you're not going to do well in an interview. One of my bosses actually told me some time back, that it's usually a good thing to do as many interviews as you can. And in fact, for them, they usually like to do an interview every year, even if they are not going to go for the job, because it puts them in the pressure position and allows them to synthesize and distill their thoughts, as well as to identify weaknesses which could potentially really ding them in the future. Okay, so practice, practice, practice. Get a mentor. It's important to get someone that can look through your answers, that can see how you're answering questions and give you feedback. Okay, it could be a physical person, it could even be yourself. And a good example is we used to use some software to actually record ourselves when we're answering questions. And then from that, you would play and you'd realize, oh, I think I say this a lot, okay? Or I think this went too long. I did this question for 5 minutes when it was a simple question. So get a mentor, someone who can look through and correct you and give you constructive feedback, or do it yourself and always identify areas you can always improve in after identifying places that you've done well in. Again, practice, 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 do as many interviews as you can. Okay, that's the only solution. Otherwise, these things all remain very theoretical. Finally, watch videos of people interviewing because it helps you to become more confident yourself. I personally was really helped by Anthony Stark videos, and it's actually my mom who introduced me to them, and I really love them. Okay, so every time I go through a question and I want to see how a pro answered the question, I can just go into YouTube and try and see. And there's a lot of material on YouTube, a lot of information out there, a lot of things to read. For instance, if it's salary negotiations, go to YouTube. You'll see so much substance, okay? And then you can take what is important to you and adapt it to your situation. I love TED Talks. TED Talks are a good way of knowing how to communicate impactfully, okay? So for instance, you remember that interview I told you where people were given 50 slides and told to make a presentation. One of the fastest way not to do well in that interview is to put all 50 slides, okay? Because then it shows that you cannot summarize your points impactfully and story tell very, again, impactfully. So watch TED Talks. In TED Talks, you'll realize they use very little slides, okay? They use more pictures, but they bring out the stories very well. If you get to a habit of seeing how people communicate, because interviews about communication, you're going to become better yourself. You're going to become an effective communicator. Then learn. We are in a knowledge era. Information is power. Everything is everywhere. Go to LinkedIn Learning. You can learn how to do different things, how to effectively communicate, how to communicate with impact. Read books on communication. Read books that widen your scope of view. And I'm going to speak from experience as a doctor. One of the biggest mistakes we do is we all just stick to medicine, okay? Now, when you go to another interview, you don't have rich discussions that inspire people, okay? You just are just dull, okay? So read a lot. It makes you become better. It exposes you more. I learn a lot. LinkedIn Learning, Udemy, Coursera, edX, all these things are there. Most of them for free, by the way, okay? So if you get an opportunity, always improve yourself. I've finished my presentation. I'm going to summarize what I've said. So today we've spoken about how to position yourself in the marketplace, and in particular focused on interviews. So for interviews, we've focused on the types of interviews. Then we've gone ahead to give examples. Then we've gone also to preparing for the interview itself, both pre-interview, interview, and post-interview. And I've given you some nuggets of wisdom I've accumulated over some time. And then I've finally spoken about some of the pitfalls that you may face through when you're doing interviews, and finished by giving you some of the next steps. I hope this has been very impactful to all of you. I've created more time for questions. I'm going to open my camera now. I'm going to stop sharing, and we're going to keep discussing. So back to you, Dr. Hagai.
Yeah, thank you very much, Doc. This has been extremely insightful. We truly appreciate that you created time for this. Yeah, so a couple of questions in the chat box. I'll start with the first one, which I saw. I think Dr. Okova was asking, is it okay to say you don't have any questions when the Q&A part of the interview gets there?
You know, I wouldn't really advise you to do that, okay? Because for me personally, as a person, if you tell me you have no questions, even one, I don't know, for me, it kind of paints a picture of lack of interest, okay? And so it could be okay, because sometimes we genuinely do not have a question, but at least prepare, at least ask one question, one thoughtful question to the interviewing panel, okay? Because there must be something you're thinking of asking. I would personally, in my opinion, really refrain from not asking any question. At least ask one question at the very worst, okay? Yeah.
Thank you, Doc. Then the second question is, could you, this is Raysam asking, could you walk us through the EES model and perhaps give us your approach to the tell me about yourself, or walk us through your CV, or yeah, so yeah, yourself now as Dr. Biko, just put it into perspective.
Okay, I'm going to give an example, which is really thought up. I haven't really practiced on this for some time, but the thing I do whenever I prepare for any interview, because this is definitely going to come in majority of the cases, is I take a paper and put it in landscape, and then I put the salient timelines in my CV. So for instance, I'd start with education, University of Nairobi, then I'd put maybe experience, maybe the places I worked in. And then in each of these major topics, I would go and pick out around 2 points that I'm going to, you know, kind of really touch on very briefly when I'm saying about myself. And then keeping the EES framework in mind: education, experience, skills. Experience, skills, education. Those have to come out, okay? Then after I do that, I pick the points and then I weave them into a story. So I would answer something like this. So my name is William. I'm a medical doctor by profession with over 5 years experience treating patients and working in some of the leading pharmaceutical companies globally. I studied at the University of Nairobi, graduated in 2012, before proceeding for my internship at Kijabe Mission Hospital. I really enjoyed my time at Kijabe Mission Hospital because I got the opportunity to learn some critical skills like leadership, but also working across teams. Here I was able to work with several teams when I was doing surgeries, and this really ingrained in me the skills to be able to work across, let's say, work across professions like with nurses and all. After that, I proceeded to Hscr, where I worked as a medical officer. Again, it was a very pivotal time in my career because I got the opportunity to lead my hospital as an assistant medical superintendent. Just being able to deal with different people and solve different problems, in addition to my medicine, really created perspective and gave me an indication of what I wanted to do next. And for this reason, I decided to move to the private sector because I wanted to get more managerial skills. I was lucky to work for one of the largest organization HMOs in the country. Here, again, I not only built on my clinical skills and acumen, but I also got the opportunity to manage the profit and loss statement of different branches, something I'm very proud of. And this again gave me an opportunity to really understand the intersection of healthcare and business, something again which fueled me to go further and seek more education for my master's in management. And so I would go like that and then now try to bring out the salient points, again, really dependent on what the job description was asking. So if there was leadership, I'd put leadership there. If it was working across teams, I'd put working across teams there. If it was something like so managing conflict, I'd just, you know, kind of pepper it on top there. You don't want to go too long. 3 to 5 minutes is okay. but you want by the end of those sessions to have listed some very critical things that make you stand out in the eyes of the interviewer. So that's what I do. Education, experience, skills, and how they tie up with this job you're going to do. It takes time to learn how to do that, but then you need to learn how to do. So that's kind of a kind of a freestyle thing I would have done right now. But again, I always would want to merge it with the job description and what they're looking for in the job. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Doc. Someone is asking, is it compulsory for one to have a CV revamp before an interview? Is it compulsory?
Okay. So maybe the question is not very clear, but what I'll assume they're asking is, A, maybe do you have to have a relook at your CV before maybe every interview? I think that's what I'll answer. So in case it's not clear, then perhaps just ask it again and clarify exactly what you want to learn. So like I said to begin with, it's always good to adapt your CV based on the job you're applying for. Because for instance, I applied for Amazon at some point. I'm a medical doctor, okay? So telling Amazon about surgeries is not going to be something very helpful to them. They probably will throw my CV away, okay? Because they're not seeing how these two things connect to begin with, e-commerce and healthcare. But if I rephrased some of the points that I did in medical school, like working across teams in very stressful situations, then I would frame it that way, and it would be less excoriating or something like that to Amazon people, okay? And that's why I'm saying it's very critical to adapt. It could be the same points, just expressed differently, okay? So framing becomes very, very important because it makes you relevant. So that's why I insist, do not have one generic CV which you send to Amazon and you send to AAR Healthcare, you send to McKinsey, you send to something else. It just will not work, okay? So it's very important to adapt your CV. It could be the same CV, just framed differently, based on what these people are looking for. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Doc. Another question is, someone is asking, how should I tackle any gaps I have in my employment history part of my CV? How do I address that?
Yeah, so I think that's a very good point, because during the pre-interview, you need to already start brainstorming some of those difficulties you're likely to face, okay? And so if you had any gaps, one good way of proactively dealing with gaps is by ensuring you are consistently doing something. Even if you do not have employment, you want to be doing a course on Coursera or something on edX, something to improve your skill, okay? So that when it comes to that point, and I would say preempt those things, don't wait to be asked, okay? So if there's a gap in a CV, you'd say, at this point, I was not able to get employment and I used the time meaningfully to improve my skills on Excel. I managed to get 2 certifications in Excel during this time, blah, 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 blah. You're getting? So you want to explain those gaps skillfully with something you did during that time. And there must have been something you're doing, well, unless you are completely not in this world, okay? So you have to really think about something you're doing and how it applies to that job, okay? And preemptively answer that question, because it's worse if someone asks you and realizes a gap that you did not address before they asked you, because now you're on the defensive, you're getting, and that probably would not be so good. So if you have any time that you don't have a job or anything, please gain a skill, okay? Gain a skill, teach yourself something new, go to edX, Coursera, learn something, volunteer, okay? Put your skills into use. You could be a doctor who has not been employed during that time, but maybe during that time you volunteered. Maybe during that time you decided, hey, you know, I realized communication skills are very important in healthcare. And so I taught myself communication skills. You're getting during that time period. So it always has to look that there's always something you're doing during gaps. Because if you leave a gap unaddressed, it raises red flags. points, and that's not good for you. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Doc, for that. We appreciate. Another question I'll ask, it's not in the chat box, but this is a question I've realized, and they're quite common these days, something to do with aptitude tests for interview. How exactly do you handle? What do they look for in those stressful?
Yeah. Well, it depends. Now this is in my other life actually. So the time I was in med school, I applied for the Kenya Airways Ab Initio program. I don't know if any of you remember it. So there's a time Kenya Airways used to take anyone who finished Form 4 and train them, and then you would pay back as you're working. So I managed to go through 3 or 4 interviews in my first year of medical school. And one of the things we had to do again was the aptitude test. So for that particular one, the type of aptitude they're looking at is, say, mathematical and all that, because we are given a lot of mathematical questions and you had to answer as many of them accurately as possible. Okay, so they are testing for accuracy and they're testing for maybe quantitative skills. Then there are some we did which were kind of critical reasoning, just to see how well you can, say, synthesize data and make kind of decisions from them in a very quick but accurate way. So aptitude differs in different places. I've had PwC and other people do different types of aptitudes, okay, which I'm not really privy to, but there could be even things like abstract reasoning, where they give you shapes and ask you which is the next shape, okay, kind of things which just try and test your intellectual capacity in ways that it's kind of IQ tests in some areas, okay? Or it could be adapted specifically for a specific type of job. So aptitudes differ in many ways. So this is why it's important to do a pre-interview, okay, with people who have either done that before, people working in these organizations, just to try and understand what type of aptitudes they have. And you can then go to the internet and try and check some of these things out, just for you to be prepared. So it varies.
Oh, thank you, Doc. Preparation. Another question I'll ask, how differently will you approach, let's say there's a typical job interview, and then there's an interview, let's say, for a scholarship. Are there any different approaches for that that you may want to, because you may want to suggest to us or communicate to us, because I believe we're in different stages of our careers, and that will come in handy.
Again, I just say it's really important to read the fine lines between, because even scholarships themselves have a description, okay? It could be a leadership scholarship, okay? So in that case, you'd really want to either write a personal statement which highlights leadership. It could be a scholarship that wants maybe academic excellence, okay? And so you'd really want to gear your CV and your cover letter demonstrating your academic prowess. It could be maybe even a needs-based scholarship, okay, which just wants to support people who are sharp but are unable to provide or, let's say, pay for themselves because of XYZ. Maybe they don't have any dependents, or their dependents earn below a certain salary. And so you do really want to make those things to become very salient in your application. So it's different. I just advise, read that scholarship description very clearly, okay? And just try and read through what they want to see. Is it leadership? Is it something else? Is it your ability to do co-curricular activities? They usually indicate those. Yeah, and so you should go ahead and just try and make those out very clearly. The key point is, whenever you're on this side preparing for something, always give as much information to the other person, as much relevant information to the other person, in a way that they do not need to think really hard when making a decision. And I'll give you an example. If a scholarship wants to show leadership, and your leadership does not come out very clearly, it does not come out very openly, there are 1,000 letters in front of him he's definitely not going to give you an opportunity because he's trying to connect. Maybe you said leadership in a very unclear way, and this person is really struggling to see how you fit in there. That becomes a problem. So for instance, like I showed you last time, when I do personal statements or when I do applications, I usually highlight what I'm going to tell this person. You see? So for instance, I'll write, hey, I am very interested in joining your organization. And I believe these 3 key aspects make me suitable for this opportunity. My ability to, my learning agility, my past demonstrated experience in working in this area and all that. Then I highlight them. So it's always a good thing to tell someone what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you've told them. So just tie in the dots for these people, okay? Because they have thousands of applications. Don't make it hard for them to see what you're trying to say. I'd just say that in summary. It's a skill, it comes over time. It's very nuanced, and you'd have to do a lot of them to try and see what I'm saying. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Doc. Okoth, I think you've raised your hand. You have a question?
Yes, thank you, Haggai. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Doc, as well for the insights you shared. It's good to see you again. My question revolves around when you're, let me say, in the interview session and you're asked, do you have any question for us? What do you think are the key things that one would ask, and how would you suggest that one goes about asking these questions without coming out, without throwing the negative vibes to the panel, especially maybe if one has concerns around some things like company culture, maybe in your preparation you notice that this company has got a high turnover rate, for instance. How do you raise such questions without throwing a negative vibe back to your interviewers?
Yeah, so I think now this is where framing becomes very, very important. Okay. Did I give you the example of the drug last time on framing and how it elicits different reactions? So maybe I'm going to do it again. If I came to you today and told you I would give you a medicine that will result in 70% of you dying, okay? Or if I said I have this amazing drug that will cause 30% of you to survive, okay? Which one are you likely to take? And research has shown that people are likely to take the 30%, even though these 2 things are the same thing, okay? Because how you frame something becomes very, very important on what people hear. So for instance, if it's a company which has high turnover, you'd want to thank the interviewers for having the session. And you'd want to say, I think one of the things that is very important for me is, let's say, work-life balance. I'm just curious about how your company really perpetuates work-life balance amongst employees. And for instance, what are some of the things that you are doing to just ensure that employees are happy and more engaged with their work? So I'd throw that question that way. Of course, I wouldn't start mentioning about, I realize your company has a high turnover, and people leave your company a lot, So I just try to bring it in a curveball and just try to see, like, what support features do you have to ensure that people have work-life integration. One of the others I find very easy to ask is really putting the interviewers on the spot myself. And I like doing that, okay? Giving them questions where they are forced to think, you're getting. So for instance, the question was like, I realized it was very easy to ask someone, what do you like most about this company? Because that's a straight answer. I can tell you all the work culture and all that. But then I rephrased that question to ask, what wouldn't you change in this company if you ever became the CEO? What's that one thing that really, summarizes this company's, let's say, values and all that for you in a personal capacity? Because again, you don't want to ask questions which are generic. You want to be very specific to the question you're asking. You want to ask about opportunities, like, for instance, I'm very interested in growth, and I'm really keen on my career development. For instance, what opportunities could I have when I join this company that would help me to ensure that I develop professionally, let's say in a particular area. I get it. So you'd want to give those questions that really cannot be found in the website. Okay. And so, or tell me what's one of the biggest achievements you're most proud of in this company that lives up to the company values, things like that. So again, that's nuance. You'd need to prepare such questions ahead of time, so for them to come out even better. And this, again, I'd say, for instance, I once went to an interview. When I was doing the pre-interview, I realized that the top person had worked in the company for very, very long. So actually, that's how I brought about the question. You know, for instance, I've just realized that you've worked in this company for a very, very long time. And I mean, I'm very curious, what's that one thing that has really, you know, made you stay in this company the longest, you know, things like that. So you'd want to be very specific. That's what I'd say.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, thank you so much, Doc. We are actually at 9:30. Our time is up, but just one question. In your presentation, you've brought clearly that there are times you had to deal with new terrains, things that you haven't seen before. You talked of EBITDA, you talked of someone tell you to value companies in New York and you haven't been there. So how do you handle such situations, and especially when you're already in that environment where things look to be completely new?
I think the success of that really depends on your preparation. Okay. So for instance, even though I was going to this organization which was completely out of my sector, I'd already tried to tie in places where there were similarities. Okay. So for instance, in this company, which was a big global consulting firm that does management consulting, I already knew these people want people with problem-solving capabilities. Okay. So already in my preparation, in my pre-interview, I tried to see areas in healthcare where I'd done a lot of problem solving, I'd collected a lot of data and made decisions with them. Okay. So is it in something like seeing a patient? It involves a lot of problem solving, you know, just being able to communicate effectively to try and bring out aspects in the patient. And so preparation becomes important because you have to preempt those things. Okay. Because if you appeared in an Amazon interview, Amazon finance interview with a medical background, there are already so many questions there. Okay, because wow, how do these two things even connect to begin? So I would preempt those questions ahead of time because I know that's going to come out. Okay, so I'd want to make it easy for this person to see the connection before they ask me. So prior preparation becomes critical. Having informational interviews become critical. Okay, just for you to get the type of questions that they ask and you to try and position yourself. So I'd say these cross-sector changes, you really need to do a lot of work ahead of time and try and, you know, kind of convince someone or persuade them that these two things are by they are not too different. Even though they look too different, there are some places that they connect that are very fundamental. So that's what I'd tell you. That's what helped me. I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yes, I've heard the word preparation. Just doing your prior homework so that you're not really in shock and at that particular moment that you sort of preempted those things.
Yeah, actually for that interview, by the way, so in our school, and I was in Yale, very few people used to get those interviews, okay? And remember, this was me, a doctor, going to one of the top consulting firms, and I had classmates who had done finance, who had been in management, and out of like almost 500 people, only like 20 used to get interviews, okay? And the thing I used is I actually did my informational interview with someone who was in the company who was an engineer. Okay. And I just tried to ask them, how did you connect these two? And when I went back, I preempted that by actually saying in my cover letter that I'd spoken to this guy who himself was an engineer and had transitioned into this thing. And I said how that gave me confidence that it is very easy to move from one sector to the other. So I kind of started preempting a lot of those things just to try and show them, look, by the way, there's actually been someone who's done cross-sector before successfully. So here I am, and I think I have what it takes. And of course, I had to tweak my CV very carefully also to try and use my medical background to fit into consulting.
All right, brilliant. Thank you so much, Doc, for creating time. We appreciate once again. Just before I hand it over to Chadwick, Dr. Chadwick, maybe you can just end with on a light note and tell us what edutainment is. Yes, maybe a new word we'll learn.
I think just forming big terms to confuse people is such a good thing. Anyway, edutainment is just, I define it as education and entertainment. Okay. So for instance, in my free time, I'm watching documentaries, history documentaries. You know, you're watching documentaries about, let's say, how Tesla is building, you know, how the battery works, the battery pack works, and things like that. So I'm just entertaining myself by learning new things, you know, in different sectors and all that. So that's what I call edutainment. Oh, I actually just go into Udemy and pick up technology and take a course in technology, you know, and just learn something new. So yeah, that's edutainment, education and entertainment. Yeah, I'm a boring guy. That's what I do for fun, actually.
Thank you very much, Doc. We truly appreciate. Maybe you can appreciate Doc with your favorite emoji, and I don't know, yeah, whatever suits the mood right now. Chad, you can take over.
Thank you so much, Haggai. Thank you, Daktari, for that very informative session. I think personally I've really learned a lot. One of the things and the bad habits that has been corrected in this session today is this idea of having one ubiquitous CV that you wield in every. Some people even go ahead to borrow CV from other people and they just edit. So I think those are some of the bad manners that we've been having, and that can also show by the results that we've been getting. Yeah, and I feel like part of my take-home message is that when it comes to CV, we have to be as intentional as possible and to be as adaptable as possible depending on our research before the interview and just do a thorough job. So I think that for me, I never knew actually should tweak your CV according to your employer. So I think that has been quite a learning point for me. And being also very excellent in the research work that we do before the interview. I think especially around Christian circles, again, we just go into prayer, which is good. And we just pray and believe God that all things will work together for our good. But the due diligence, the seeking out of knowledge, and being in a position even to, you know, get information about the interviewers. And also that bad habit of asking about what is the salary. I think all that has been clearly dealt with today, and we'll have some decorum in the next interviews that we'll face. So thank you so much, Daktari. Before we end this, from my heart and also to represent the diverse kind of people that are in this group, we are truly grateful to have had this information. I think for most of us, interviews are just what you are told by your mother or your father, you know, do this or go read on that. But I think you've really brought a very structured, even on that question on tell us about yourself. You know, people answer that question differently. Some start by talking about social issues, but you've at least brought us into a lot of perspective on what we need to do and how to convince the employer. Because you mentioned something very important. They're looking for someone who is going to meet a need. And it should be very clear at the end of an interview and even in our CV that we are best qualified to meet that need. So thank you so much. And I honestly wish that we have more of these sessions. so that we are able to be thoroughly equipped. And even your final exhortation was practice, practice, practice. I think that is what will make us have a difference. So at this point, I also want to recognize someone who's been our midst. She's been listening quietly. I would just like her to maybe give us a parting shot and then pray for us. And that is our mother in the faith and also our pastor, Pastor Lorraine Rakiro. She'll just say a word and then send us off with the blessings of God. Welcome, Mom. Okay, it seems as though she may not be readily available right now. Okay, I think then in that case, I will just end the meeting with a prayer. And then I don't know if Daktari will, if someone needs to contact you after this, is there like a contact information?
I think there's a contact information, but I want to make you guys work a little bit hard. Go to LinkedIn and actually ask for a request, ask for a connection request. Because I need to see all your LinkedIn profiles. So
That's good. That's great.
Like that. This one.
All right, so we have an assignment. Daktari needs to see our LinkedIn profiles. And I think one of the other things also mentioned is that we need to make it professional. Upgrade our LinkedIn, and even some of our profile pictures need now to change, especially on LinkedIn. Some of us have photos of cartoons on LinkedIn, and I think from this session we are delivered. We are delivered. All right. So I think at this point, allow me just to make a prayer, and then the meeting shall be adjourned until the next time. Look out for the next edition. We shall communicate in good time. Let us pray. Precious Father, in the name of the Lord, thank you, Lord, because you are training us and you are preparing us. Just like the Hebrew boys had to go through a training program that would see to it that they would take dominion even in a foreign land. I thank you, Lord, for the session we've had today and how we've been taught about the types of interviews and how to prepare ourselves adequately to be able to enter into the marketplace and become effective and even to bring the kingdom agenda of God into the marketplace. Father, I pray that this information shall become precious and useful to us, even for our subsequent applications. We also thank you for the speaker of today. Father, just as he has refreshed us, we pray that may you refresh him in a big way in Jesus' name. Refresh his knowledge bank, refresh even his resource bank in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, and cause him to be even a greater blessing to a greater audience. We thank you, Lord, and we give you praise for everyone who has attended tonight. Let this session, Lord, become a game changer, even, Lord, for our future engagements. This we give you glory and we thank you. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Asanteni sana. The Lord be with you and bless you all. And we'll meet again.
Kwaheri.
You are free to say hi to the speaker as you enjoy tea with the speaker.
Allah.